My name is Sam Hart, and I'm the Director General of the Abia State Marketing and Quality Management Agency. At the onset of the global COVID-19 pandemic, the Governor of Abia State, Dr. Okezie Victor Ikpeazu, gave a charge to our Abia tailors and artisans to rise up and meet the global shortage in face masks and other PPEs. I am proud to announce to you that Abia tailors and artisans have been able to produce over 1 million face masks, which has been distributed around Nigeria. Aba has the capacity to bridge the global shortage in PPE, nose masks, and other medical essentials, and we are here for you. You can reach us on phone number 0817 777 1306.
Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Osasu Show. Today we'll be talking about the fiscal consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're speaking to the Associate Fellow Africa Program at Chatham House, Matthew Page. He'll be discussing with us what this fiscal flu, the impact this fiscal flu will have on the Nigerian economy and what are some sustainable solutions the Nigerian government can prefer, as well as those of us in the private sector. Don't go anywhere, it promises to be a very intellectually engaging episode. Matthew Page, Associate Fellow of the Africa Program at Chatham House, welcome to today's program.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. All right, you wrote a brilliant op-ed recently, and I'm just going to read out a bit for you. You said, already seen as the world's poverty capital, Nigeria is home to about 15% of the world's poor, with this anticipated to increase to around 30% by 2030. And you top this off by saying Nigeria is about to go broke. Explain to me what you mean.
Sure. It's a complicated story, as we know. Everything when it comes to Nigeria is complex and multi-layered and multifaceted. And what Nigeria is facing now with the coronavirus crisis is the after effects of the global economic impact of the pandemic. So we know that crude oil prices, for example, have gone way down, and that has had a huge effect on Nigerian government revenues. Likewise, remittances from Nigerians living abroad in the diaspora have gone way down as well. And that's a really significant part of Nigeria's gross domestic product that many of us don't really appreciate quite how much money flows back into Nigeria from Nigerians living abroad. So when I sounded the alarm in this piece for Chatham House last week, I wasn't trying to talk Nigeria down or tell people something that they weren't already aware of in terms of the socioeconomic and financial challenges Nigeria faces, but rather linking it to a crisis which currently people are viewing in terms of the medical side and the human side and the cost and the illness and the deaths that people are experiencing, and really saying to people, well, if we look beyond the immediate concerns, there are going to be really significant long-term economic and financial consequences to this crisis that we need to appreciate now before it's too late.
And when you say these are not statistics or data that people don't already know, I think you are expecting too much from the ordinary Nigeria. I mean, we are told that we are the giant of Africa. We are told that Nigeria is rich in natural resources, that we are, the leading country in Africa in terms of economic growth. But when we actually sit down and take a look at the entire country, we realize that, yes, what you said is true. Nigeria is about to go broke if we're not broke already. Our external reserves has depleted to a meager $72 million. What is the way forward? What do we need to start doing now to plan for a post-hydrocarbon economy?
Well, I mean, as we know, one can't sort of turn around an ocean liner, in a split second. There's a need to really begin immediately making some very strategic changes and reforms into how the Nigerian government operates and how it funds itself. And I'm not just talking about the federal government. I think people tend to, turn this into a political discussion and heap blame on one side or the other. But the fiscal challenges, the financial challenges that Nigeria faces today are really a product, right, of decades and decades of poor decision-making by government leaders, both at the federal level and during the period of military rule, but also at the state level. As we know, Nigeria is a collection of 36 states, which themselves are the size, both in terms of population and in terms of economies and budgets, of small African countries or small countries elsewhere in the world. So there's a multi-layered, answer to that question. But it starts with reining in waste and reining in corruption, of course, at the federal and state level, and that has to be more than cosmetic. Really, a lot of the cosmetic stuff has already been done by this administration. And instead, there are some real tougher sacrifices and choices that need to be made. Nigeria is resilient. It is the giants of Africa. But as we know from the story of David and Goliath, something small, something very potent like coronavirus and the economic fallout from that crisis can bring down giants and can test the resilience of a country like Nigeria.
But do we have the political will to change the course or chart a new course for economic development? Because we look at decades long of communication regarding the diversification of our economy. It seems we're just playing lip service to it. You are an expert on African policy and politics, but from your own experience working on the continent for decades, do you believe that Nigeria today stands a chance of making it post-COVID-19?
Well, Nigeria will carry on. I'm not worried. I guess I'm not worried about sort of the downfall or collapse of Nigeria as a state. I'm worried about the sort of the long-term fallout and the long-term implications for the real challenges, the socioeconomic challenges you mentioned at the beginning. Deepening poverty, population growth that is outpacing economic growth, even during good times, during growth periods, an over-reliance on petroleum as a source of government revenues, and the approach that I think both Nigerian politicians and sometimes everyday Nigerians have when it comes to petroleum revenues, which is that national cake approach. The sort of dividing up the spoils, like this is manna from heaven and not revenue that someday will diminish and dry up. It's clear that Nigeria has not put its incredible oil wealth to great use for the development of the country. And instead, a lot of that money has essentially sort of dissipated and trickled out without really yielding permanent gains. So the solutions are really challenging, but they are, I think, feasible if, as you say, the political will on the part of leaders to change these dynamics, and no one's saying that they wake up tomorrow and Nigerian political culture flips 180 degrees and becomes, Scandinavian or Swiss in approach and tone and level of management. But there needs to be some of the worst and most glaring failures. Those need to be eschewed and fixed, and so that Nigeria can move ahead.
But if we continue on this trajectory, because as I said, we know, we've paid lip service to this diversification and the need to save and the need to increase our IGR and the need for states to increase their tax revenue and collections, but we simply are not doing enough, So if Nigeria continues on this trajectory, where do you see us in just a year from now? Given the fact that there's a global depression looming and all the countries that we typically rely on for aid are going to have their own internal problems to deal with.
Yeah, I think we saw a somewhat of a preview of what we may see in a year's time back in 2015 when the last recession hit Nigeria, again, triggered by a decline in oil prices. People, I think, often say, well, oil revenues, account for maybe 50% of, or sometimes the number is claimed to be higher, of government revenues, government income. But in fact, indirectly, they account for so much more because a lot of government revenue, as we know, is derived from taxes taken out of civil servant salaries and so forth. And ultimately, anything that is paid for, right, out of oil revenues, that then some amount of that is remitted back to the Treasury, is still indirectly an oil revenue. So what we're going to see in a year's time, potentially, is the inability of the federal and state government to meet its salary obligations, to meet its debt servicing obligations, to meet payments for projects, for contracts that are underway, and basic operating costs of government agencies. So what we'll see is essentially the government and the civil service and other programs running on fumes, running on empty, existing on paper and not really existing in reality. And civil servants, as we know in Nigeria, are very resilient. There are many months that they work without getting paid by their state governor or what have you, until maybe a month or two before the election, and then the governor hastily releases a lot of civil servant salaries. So there is often a light at the end of that tunnel for some civil servants, and they feel like even if their salary is irregular, it's better than no salary at all. But the challenge is when that period goes on for an extended period of time, how does a government function when it can't pay its workers or meet its obligations? Because it's spread itself so thin.
But some would argue we've already faced that reality. So we have this saying in Nigeria, and I'm sure you're familiar with it from being here for so many years, is that God is Nigerian. Nigeria will survive through thick and thin, through depression, through recession, through the plague. We will find a way to come out and still survive and continue business as usual. So that's one thing that also scares me, the fact that we can actually live in a post-COVID era without actually learning from this pandemic. So that's one thing that scares me, that we would return to normal, because normalcy wasn't working in the first place. So do you believe that despite this frightening reality that you've painted for us, Nigeria is just going to adapt to it as it's normal, because as I said, this is the reality that we've actually had to live with: the non-payment of salaries, the the recession, the prolonged recession that we saw from 2015 to 2017. Do you believe that Nigerians are just going to say, okay, this is our fate and we'll continue to live with it and, go about their daily businesses?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I guess I'm not trying to frighten so much as to present sobering news. As you say, Nigeria has already been living almost in a Nigerians have lived sort of in a post-apocalyptic context on a daily basis anyway, right? Most people rely on boreholes to get their water. They rely on private schools to send their children to. They pay private clinics to get basic medical treatment. So their reliance on public services is already very minimal, right? And there, as you say, there has sort of been a decline and destruction and degradation of public goods in Nigeria that's been ongoing for a long time. So Nigerians' resilience is very high. Their expectations or reliance on things outside of their own family, community units is very low, and so they will soldier on through this crisis, even if salaries slow and then stop for a period of time. They'll adapt. But what that means, as we know, survival is not progress, right? And for Nigeria, given its a huge population, its population growth, and its other internal challenges, whether it be insecurity, whether it be the effects of climate change, these what I call slow motion challenges, right? Challenges that are sort of imperceptible sometimes on a daily basis, but over years and decades are extremely apparent. Nigeria and Nigerians' ability to weather those crises, both collectively and individually, will take a severe hit, I guess, because of this crisis. But as you say, many aspects of this crisis, maybe in lesser degrees, preexisted before coronavirus, and in a way, Nigeria is better prepared than the U.S., UK, Sweden, Switzerland to weather this crisis, because most Nigerians have already been living in crisis for such a long time.
So for the state governors, the ministers, the others in the executive arm of governments, they are listening to you today and wondering, okay, what can I do differently? I'm just a state governor. I'm just a minister. I'm just a local government chairman. What can they do differently in their own political space to see that, they can alleviate the burden of this pandemic and its economic hardship on the lives of their constituents?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I think they need to do what they should have done a long time ago, which is, try to recreate a social contract with Nigerians who they govern. Turn around to the people who are asking them to help them out with school fees, hospital bills, to ask them to carry them along, in their political journey. Turn to them and say, this is a crisis. The Nigerian government is out of money. Ministers, governors, local government chairmen, they need to lead by example, and they need to refuse those perks of the job. They need to turn to the people who they usually carry along in order to maintain their position, and explain that the crisis has disrupted politics as usual, and that the cupboard is bare, and what little is left, what little crumbs are left, have to be put to use for the people. There is no extra, there is no endless stream of revenues as there was in the past. I know that wasn't true even then, but that was certainly the perception. The national cake has effectively disappeared. And so when the cake disappears, the conversation, top elites, top leaders having the conversation about how to divide it up is pointless. And they need to strike a balance, I think, between obviously protecting the jobs of civil servants and so forth, but eventually right-sizing government and focusing it on the needs of everyday Nigerians. I mean, Nigeria has 3 space agencies. Why? I mean, it needs more health and education and roads and power, but there are many things that it pays for that it doesn't need.
And I think President Muhammadu Buhari actually took a step in ensuring that we cut down the waste in the public sector, given the fact that he gave the Secretary to the Government of the Federation a go-ahead to implement the Oronsaye report. So that's actually a step in the right direction, and I hope that implementation will lead to some of these sustainable solutions that you've reeled out.
Yeah, the reappearance, shall we say, of the Oronsaye report after almost more than a decade, I think, is positive. I think the one thing I would say is, better late than never. This is something that should have been implemented at the time. The Oronsaye report, if you read it, is is not shaking tables. I mean, it doesn't put forth sweeping reforms of Nigerian government agencies. It makes some very modest, common sense changes that would consolidate and reform government. And yeah, I think the sooner that's implemented and then serves as a starting line for additional reforms and additional right-sizing. What I worry about, and I know you worry about it too, is once they tick the box on the partial, probably, implementation of the Oronsaye report, they'll pat them on the backs and consider that the job is done. And I think that, again, that won't realize enough change to really make a difference going forward. It needs to be the starting point, not the end point.
Most definitely. Finally, Matthew, we've seen President Trump recently state that he's been taking chloroquine to prevent coronavirus. As you know, in Nigeria, most COVID patients, we're treating them here with chloroquine and we're seeing a high rate of recovery. Why is it that in the United States, the FDA has refused to acknowledge that chloroquine is helping in combating the coronavirus?
President Trump is, again, not a medical professional, and his advice, or even what he chooses to do personally, should not be what we all do personally. So, again, very, very dangerous to begin this sort of amateur medical response to coronavirus, which is a disease that people are still learning so much about. And that manifests itself differently in different patients of different ages, in different locations, and so far has not responded to any conventional treatments or any sort of vaccine that's on the market yet. So until those things are proven, the best thing all of us can do is undertake social distancing in a meaningful way and obviously cover our mouth and face when we're around others, because we may transmit the disease. We may be asymptomatic, i.e. not showing symptoms of the disease, but yet still be able to transmit it to others, especially our elderly loved ones. So that's what I would say about this most recent revelation about America's unusual president.
That's a fine place to leave it. Thank you so much, Matthew, for your time. We wish you all the best and all the safety. Please continue to practice social distancing, and my love to all your loved ones. To watch this episode and others, you can visit our website, www.tostvnetwork.com. You can also read news on sustainable development and current affairs across Africa. Follow us on social media at The Osasu Show, at TOS TV Network, at Osasu Igbinadian, and at The Osasu Show Foundation on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'll see you same time, same place next week, and until then, continue washing your hands, continue practicing physical distancing, checking up on your loved ones, and getting enough sleep. God bless you.